Hello and welcome to the Vaults of Terra. My name is Ed and today we're going to be starting our Imperial Guard Regiment videos, and where better to start with the Death Korps of Krieg, one of the most requested Imperial Guard regiments that I've ever seen. Now, I'm going to break the Krieg videos down into several separate videos because there's so much lore on them. I want to make sure that we give decent detail for each area as opposed to just squeezing them all into one video. So today we'll be starting with their history and some of their recruitment and battle doctrine, so we can just get an overview of who the Death Korps of Krieg are and why they act the way they do. So without further ado, let me get started. Now, the Death Korps of Krieg are an Imperial Guard regiment, as I've mentioned, raised from the world of Krieg, which funnily enough means war in German if you didn't know, which is a silly thing to call your planet if you want it to remain peaceful. They are a grim and fatalistic regiment and seek to atone for their planet's past rebellion against the Imperium by dying glorious deaths in service to the Imperium. For this reason, the Death Korps regiments are routinely requested to fight in the galaxy's most dangerous battlefronts and specialise in battles of attrition and siege warfare. Now, a little bit on their history. Krieg was once a prosperous hive world, which was located in the Segmentum Tempestus, and was led by a council of autocrats. However, over the millennia, the autocrats began to become paranoid that an outside threat would take their power away from them, and thus began to increasingly fortify their world from outside threats. Finally, in the year 433 of Millennium 40, the High Autocrat declared himself independent from the Imperium and renounced the Emperor as the planet's divine master. Almost immediately, civil war broke out on Krieg, and much of the planet fell to the rebels, except the High Ferrograd, which was under the command of the now infamous Colonel Yount of the Krieg 83rd Imperial Guard Regiment, before they became the Death Korps. Under strict orders not to let Krieg fall, but in the knowledge that there was no fleet of any scale nearby that could help liberate the planet, Yount made a very hard decision. On the day of the Feast of the Emperor's Ascension, Yount unleashed a counterattack against the rebels using atomic warheads, cleansing the planet in fire in what has become known as the Purging. The resulting environmental damage destroyed Krieg's ecosystem and biosphere through nuclear fire and nuclear winter, but many of the Hive City inhabitants survived this firestorm and the radiation fallout that followed. Now, the rebels continued to fight the loyalists, but they were forced to exist underground in bunkers or deep in the radioactive chem wastelands, as their descendants do live there today. From the self-annihilation of their homeworld, the loyalist troops slowly retook the planet inch by inch over the course of 500 years, finally returning it to Imperial rule in the year 949 Millennium 40, so that is about 1,000 years ago by the Imperium calendar. It would be from this event that the Death Korps of Krieg was formed. Now, a little on their recruitment and training. By the order of the High Lords of Terra, as penance for their rebellion, Krieg's sole purpose is to produce new regiments. Not only thinking of the rebellion, but the planet has been greatly decimated, and so there's very little else it can give in tribute to the Imperium other than its men. Now, the tithes of men and women for the Guard are at the maximum possible for the planet's population, supplying over 50 million guardsmen a year. Now, I'm not sure how sustainable this is, but there are many unusual methods used on Krieg in order to continue providing soldiers, one of these being Vita wombing, using a Vita womb, which is very much like a test tube child. However, it's a dangerous practice, but ultimately tolerated in order for Krieg to keep up with its population demands. There is also a doctrine of eugenics taking place on the planet in order to weed out any mutants that form through this mass production of humanity, and on a planet devastated by nuclear weapons, they require this sort of eugenics program to make sure that the children they are providing for the Imperium are not abhorrent or going to cause any problems later on. Now, the children are trained almost from birth for the Imperial Guard, with a life in the irradiated wasteland enough to toughen the child up as they grow into soldiers. Mental conditioning breaks them and instills faith in the Emperor above self-preservation, which the ecclesiarchy calls the cult of sacrifice. It is also emphasised that their role is as a whole regiment rather than as an individual, the concept of many above the one, so sacrificing individual liberties for the whole of their regiment, which is a very utilitarian view, but one that is required in order to prevent the sort of individualism thinking that caused the wars on Krieg in the first place. Now, injury and death rates are high during training, and the final test is surviving on the surface of Krieg, performing battle drills and manoeuvres. Only those that survive this final phase of training become members of the Death Korps. Now this results in a highly disciplined guardsman, good in hand-to-hand combat, trench warfare and hazardous environment combat, such as that on planets with poor to no atmosphere. Although they do teach accuracy and weapons training, they prefer massed volleys to pinpoint accuracy from their guardsmen. Every Krieg guardsman is also given a numerical designation before their names so that their death can be more easily tallied due to the high numbers of men and women that are passing through the guard. It is easier to give them a number so that they can be identified later. Unfortunately, this training does also lead to a high degree of fatalism and an insular attitude to outsiders from the soldiers, extending to almost never taking off their rebreathers even when not in combat, which could be seen as both paranoid and a little bit freaky. This does mean that their integration with other Imperial Guard regiments is very low because it is hard for an Imperial Guard regiment to trust someone who doesn't trust the environment around them. Most officers of the Death Korps of Krieg are drawn from the rank and file, although skill rather than just seniority are used to determine who will become an officer, with many having been chosen for Death Rider duty before becoming officers. However, they are actually just as forward-thinking as their regimented men, and so even to a high level, most of these officers will fight on the front line, which does lead to some command difficulties if there is a large amount of enemy resistance, which could cause the degradation of a command structure. Now moving on to their battle doctrine, the Krieg way is attrition. Now this is exemplified during their siege warfare. They use sustained artillery barrages to precede a massive infantry attack, with waves on waves of guardsmen, led by squads of grenadiers advancing in dispersed formation before closing ranks to unleash volleys of lasfire on the enemy's defensive structures. Heavy weapon squads are used to support and protect the flanks of the Kriegsmen and shore up their defences around important strategic locations. Specialised combat engineering units also assist by undermining the enemy's defences and conducting subterranean warfare. There are also special squads of Rough Rider formations known as Death Riders, using modified gene animals, which I'll talk about later. Now, the Death Riders provide the Krieg regiment with forward scouting and tactical information, so when a regiment is on the field, they have the same amount of scouting prowess as a usual regiment, although they'd prefer Death Riders to the usual sentinels used by other forces. One thing about the Death Korps of Krieg, as I've mentioned, is they're quite fatalistic, and so unless ordered to do so, a Krieg regiment will not retreat, even when confronted by a superior force. Now, this will cause a lot of losses on the front line and can lead to the decimation of entire Krieg units when they could have easily been saved by retreating. Also, the Kriegsmen seem to prefer short-term victories over long-term gains, and so the Imperial Guard commissars, who are usually there to improve morale and up discipline, which is not quite as required of the Krieg regiment as with others, will also be there as a tactical consultant and will usually be attached to platoon and regiment commands in order to direct them in the correct ways of applying Imperial Guard tactics to their own, especially in a situation where they are required for the continuation of a conflict. Now this is everything I wanted to introduce about the Death Korps of Krieg in this introductory video. As you can see, they're quite the interesting regiment. So we will be continuing with our Imperial Guard Regiment videos, including our Krieg videos, intercut with our Space Marine Chapters videos over the next little while. We will also be taking requests for any other types of videos you think we need to include on the general Imperial Guard above the regiments, although if you want to vote for a regiment, please feel free to do so. You can do that in the comments below, or you can go to the Vox Relay, which is the Vaults of Terra forums, which is linked in the description below, where we gather suggestions for future videos. One thing we would like to do is thank everyone for our 20,000th subscriber. It's gratifying to hear so many people out there do want to hear about the lore of Warhammer 40,000, and we shall continue producing these videos so long as there are people around to watch them. One thing we would like to do to celebrate the 20,000th subscriber is to take suggestions as to what sort of video you want to see. Now this can be any sort of video at all, from something specific about the Imperium which we haven't covered yet, to the Xenos or Chaos or the Horus Heresy, or it could be something about the lore from the outside, maybe where the influences come from, or why a specific regiment, army, etc. is designed in the way it is. So to do that, please go and suggest things in the comments below, or there is a specific thread on the Vox Relay which you can go to and you can vote there. So that's everything I wanted to mention today. See you next time on the Vaults of Terra.